Hello and a very warm welcome to our third day at ProWein AGORA. My name is Alexandra Wann. I'm a wine journalist and communications strategist, and together with my company Wine and Things, I planned this new forum, this new conference forum together with ProWein, and I will guide you through the next few hours. Our next session today will be all about markets. While everyone is looking at new markets where they can target new consumers, we also want to shine a light on existing markets that seem to be saturated, but in fact they are not. You just need to know how to reconquer them. We invited 3 experts in their respective fields. First, we will have a look at the global situation to find out where the challenges and opportunities in the trade with alcoholic beverages lie. And then we will tackle 2 important mature markets: the United States of America, still the largest consumer market in the world, and Germany, the largest wine importer by volume. And we will ask the important questions: where do these markets stand right now? Which products and target groups are promising and offer opportunities for growth? Our first speaker combines extensive expertise in the global beverage industry with deep wine knowledge. As an investment analyst, he has been, analyzing at markets and companies for more than 15 years now. Today, he is managing director and leads the European Beverage Equity Research Unit at Barclays Bank, where he brings together his long-standing passion and expertise for wine. His primary focus is the impact of changing demographics on alcohol consumption, one of the most pressing issues for the industry right now. And when it comes to fundamental financial and economic insights into the alcoholic beverage sector, he is probably the most knowledgeable voice in the field. Please welcome Laurence Whyatt, Head of European Beverage Research at Barclays Bank, who will take us on a deep data dive. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you all very much for having me here. So I work at the Barclays Investment Bank, and thank you very much for the intro, Alex. We look at the global investment markets, trying to predict the trends in what's happening in the beer, spirits, and wine industries, so we can advise our clients on their investments in companies like Diageo, Pernod Ricard, AB InBev, Heineken, these sorts of businesses. So the companies we tend to look at are European, but of course they have global operations. So we need to have a view on all the major alcohol markets in the world, but we tend to focus on the big ones such as the USA, Europe, China, India, because typically those are the biggest markets for the companies that we are focused on. So global alcohol has a range of emerging and developed markets, but up here is a snapshot of some of the largest and highest consuming alcohol markets, but also some of the smallest. We tend to think in terms of per capita alcohol consumption, and that gets as high as around 12 liters of alcohol per person in some of the Eastern European markets. Europe's typically in the sort of 7 to 10 liters level, and emerging markets are sometimes quite a bit below that range. But we've highlighted some of the important markets here, such as China and India, as well as the US and Europe, and we'll get to those in a bit. So our job is really to try and predict how these markets are going to change, which markets are going to grow their per capita consumption, and which ones will decline. And that allows us to predict which of the important markets are there to invest in the future, and which ones are going to be challenges for some of the companies. And we can also see what type of alcohol each country's consume, whether that's beer, wine, or spirits, and whether that could change in the future. Because the market with growing beer volumes is important for companies like AB InBev or Heineken, but of course we need spirits growth for Diageo or Pernod Ricard. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll try and take you through some of the more larger markets of the US and Europe, as well as touching on the important markets of China and India. So in determining what is the key drivers of beer consumption and spirits consumption, we've looked at a lot of different factors that drive the alcohol consumption. And we want to look at this on a per capita basis, as well as looking at it in total. But in short, the key drivers of volume growth are simply changing demographics. When we talk about increased number of people, of course, you're going to largely have increased alcohol consumption, but not all people are equal. And I think this is one of the key areas that the industry perhaps misunderstands. So when I tend to listen to companies like Diageo and Heineken talking about demographics, they typically talk about total populations, or sometimes they talk about legal drinking age populations. But our research suggests that we should be far more nuanced on that. And it won't surprise you that an 80-year-old consumes very differently to how a 25-year-old consumes. So if we look at total populations, that gives a bit of a distorted picture. And our research suggests that the volume growth is far more dependent on the younger population, particularly for spirits consumption. It's a bit wider when it comes to beer and wine consumption, but for spirits, you really want to look at those younger people. And so whilst globally total populations are staying relatively flat, by nature of falling birth rates and people living longer, the number of young people is actually declining in many parts of the world now, leading to shrinking market sizes. So if volume growth is driven by demographics, value growth is typically driven by economics. And it's clear that the amount that the companies can charge for their products is driven by economic drivers like income and employment levels. But economics have an important driver also on how much volume people can consume of alcohol. And if we look at alcohol on a per capita basis, we can see GDP per capita is the largest influential factor on alcohol consumption. It isn't everything, but rich countries can drink less and poor countries should drink more. But it is the best predictor that we can find when we're looking at how much alcohol each market is going to consume. And we can see from here, when we track GDP per capita against per capita consumption, European countries are actually drinking a lot more than their income would suggest, implying that we should expect that level to decrease over time, but that the USA is actually in the opposite space. People drink less than their income would suggest, and so we should expect Americans to drink more over time. When we put a demographic lens on this, some of these same trends are borne out. But here, instead of looking at total population change, I'm just looking at the 25 to 45-year-old populations. And as you can see from some of the right-hand side of the chart, there are plenty of countries that are seeing quite a major decline in per capita in number of people of that age, 25 to 45. And on the more challenging side, you've got countries like China declining nearly 16% in terms of their young people over the next decade. And actually, our analysis suggests that this could even be even greater than that 16%. And also some of the major European countries looking at sort of mid-single, double-digit declines in the number of young people. And that's one of the reasons we're expecting a bit of a decline in alcohol consumption in these markets as well. But on the more optimistic side, we highlight India as one of the most important large markets for alcohol consumption. To date, it's been mainly Indian whiskey, but recent trade deals with the UK and Europe, we could expect quite a dramatic increase in both Scotch whiskey and some of the European spirits, as well as wine, albeit wine's coming from a very low base in India. And on a good news side, I'm actually expecting a bit of an improvement in the US market. The economy is very healthy, and the young population is still growing there, so we'll go into that in a bit more detail. So when we touch on the US, it is typically the second biggest market for total alcohol consumption, both in terms of sales and volumes, and usually it's the largest market for all the companies that we look at. But it's been facing a bit of an issue in recent years in terms of a recent decline in alcohol consumption. But if we take this over the sort of longer term, the US market has been characterized by increasing per capita consumption over the last 100 years, really since the end of Prohibition. That ended for two reasons: the Second World War and when America introduced the 21-year-old legal drinking age. The top of the chart, we can see there's been quite a major decline since the pandemic, when we've seen a real boost during 2020 and 2021 with alcohol consumption. And the real question in the industry today is whether this decline that we've seen in the last few years is cyclical versus structural. So we've looked at many factors to see, are there any reasons why Americans should drink more or less than their European counterparts? So we've looked at whether there's a large level of abstinence, are there large number of heavy drinkers, or level of alcoholism, which could really skew those numbers. And in essence, we determined that there aren't really, they're very similar to European levels. So we wouldn't consider these as any reason why Americans shouldn't drink higher levels of alcohol. One of the reasons they would be a little bit lower, though, is firstly, the legal drinking age of 21 is higher than most other countries where it's 18. And also, America has one of the highest levels of car ownership in the world. And of course, the increase in focus on drink driving in the last 50 years has led that fewer people, quite rightly, don't do drink driving. But either way, I don't really expect any of these two factors to explain the sort of 10 to 15 to 20% reduction in alcohol consumption in America versus European levels. So our general expectation is that alcohol consumption would increase per capita in the US. One of the concerns that we've got at the moment is that there's a lot of worry around young people and whether Gen Z are not drinking. And there's plenty of data that's coming out on here. Some of this up here in terms of total alcohol spend by generation, I think is pretty nonsense. We don't really think around Gen Z drinking so much less than millennials. The main reason for that is that simply they earn less. But these data from Gallup, I think, are a lot more interesting. When we look at numbers like 18 to 29-year-olds drinking 10% less than 30 to 49-year-olds. But of course, the big difference here is you've got the 18 to 29s drinking a lot less than the 21 to 29s. And so 3 years of different people changes that number by over 10%. And I think that's the very important factor, because the 18 to 21s very much are drinking less now. And you can see this when we look at alcohol consumption by individual age. And what you'll be worried by is if we saw a big decline in 21 to 30-year-old consumption. And that's simply what we don't see. What we do see is a decline over the past 50 years of underage consumption. Under 21s have been drinking less for 50 years. And of course, in 1984, it became illegal for them to purchase alcohol. So it's hardly a surprise that that's happened. But if we look at 21 to 30-year-olds, they've been relatively static in terms of their alcohol consumption since the early 90s. And that's happened when we look at 30-day prevalence, and the same is true when you look at 12-month prevalence. Now, if we add a little bit of nuance to this as well, we are seeing a reduction in heavy drinking episodes and sort of consecutive consumption across the younger demographics. But this is not unique to the 21 to 30-year-olds. This has been happening in the 35-plus-year-olds. And I wouldn't say that there's anything major has changed in the last 3 to 4 years. This has been a trend since around 2010, when we've seen an increase in focus on healthy living that happened around that time. The other concern that people talk about is the advent of GLP-1 drugs and whether they're going to have an impact on alcohol consumption, as they've been much more important in the US since around 2021, when they became authorized for weight loss. But when we first looked at this, we didn't really have any information on GLP-1s. We were looking at some of the studies on rodents. We were looking at some of the studies on alcoholism. And those were actually showing quite a major impact from GLP-1s on potential alcohol consumption. But what we got here was in 2024 was data from Cornell University, which looked at how supermarket baskets changed when people consumed GLP-1 drugs. And what that showed was a major decline in some of the products you'd expect: savory snacks, salty snacks. Those are the products that people weren't buying when they had GLP-1 drugs. Alcohol was only declining by 1%, so much lower than the average basket decline of 5.5%. So it's not obvious to me that GLP-1 drugs are having a major impact on alcohol consumption. And of course, the demographics of who uses these products are very different. When you look at GLP-1 users, you have 80% of GLP-1 users are female, whereas 78% of alcohol consumption in the US is male. So you've just got two very different people taking these products. We've also looked at the impact of cannabis on alcohol. We looked at this through state spend in liquor stores where cannabis has been legalized. We looked at the medical literature. We looked at some of the country data, though. And you can see here, Netherlands has had 50 years of cannabis consumption, yet still consumes alcohol in a very similar way to the Scandinavian peer countries. In fact, it consumes more alcohol than 3 out of 4 of those Scandinavian countries. So really, I can see no structural reason why per capita consumption in alcohol will continue to decline, and put the major reason for this decline in the US really down to economic factors, which I think we can illustrate here when you look at spend on alcohol in the US against income. And you can see Gen Z are actually spending more of their income on alcohol than other parts of the American demography. And in fact, this has been relatively static over the past sort of 7 or 8 years. So as we'd expect the economy to improve in the US, I would also expect the alcohol consumption to also start to improve. And in terms of what people are consuming, we are still seeing an increase in spirits consumption over the other alcohol categories. Beer's certainly losing share, wine's gaining a little bit, but it's spirits that's driving that premiumization factor. The other area that's seeing a huge level of growth is the ready-to-drink space, where we're seeing sort of an increase of around 20% over the past 12 months. Most spirits categories have been declining over the past 12 months, given the economic uncertainty in the market. And then the other area that's seeing a huge amount of growth is a non-alcohol space. It's still a very small category, but it's doubling each year in terms of spirits consumption and growing at around 20% in the beer space. In terms of why we're seeing this growth in the convenience factor, the sort of ready-to-drink space, we see this as a longer-term trend that we've seen across the seltzer space and also some of the flavor malt beverages that we've seen over the past 20 years. And there is some evidence that this is starting to slow down when you look at the total category. I appreciate that ready-to-drinks are still growing very well. But what we can also see is that they are ceding share into the spirit space as if people consume spirits-based cocktails, then they're also more likely to consume spirits bottles in the future as well. So it can be quite helpful to the market. So having spent a lot of time on the US market, I'm going to touch on some of the other major alcohol markets in the world, starting with China. Now, China has been a very interesting alcohol market over the past 20, 30 years, and it was an area of huge growth over the past decade. It went through the anti-conspicuous consumption issues in around sort of 2014 to 2016 last year, but since then had enormous double-digit growth. But that growth has really stalled for some of the important companies since the pandemic. And we make the argument that we're seeing a real change in demography in China that's really driving that change in consumption. And you can see on a per capita basis, China has actually been declining its alcohol consumption since 2015. We've seen a halving of spirits consumption since 2016 and a decline in beer consumption by about 20% since 2013. And that can be illustrated by this increase in share from beer and cider into spirits. And one of the reasons I think people have misunderstood this is the forecasting of number of people in China has been incorrect for the past 30 years. When you look at the UN expectations of China's population, they've got it wrong pretty much every year that they come up with a new forecast. Right at the top of the chart is the forecast of China's population from the 90s, and you can see the red line, which is the latest forecast that's been the lowest yet. We've done some of our own forecasting of China's population, and we actually see it as even more pessimistic than where the UN is. Now, that's total population. As I said earlier, we should be caring about the young population. This is the forecast of the 25 to 45-year-olds in China over the next decade. This period between 2000 and 2020, that's when China was delivering double-digit growth for both GDP and often alcohol sales. The chart on the right is going to be the next 10 years, where we see a material decline in the number of young people in China. And we're forecasting that to cause a continued decline in spirits consumption in the country, as well as beer consumption in the country. So whilst a lot of people are still expecting China to deliver some of the growth, we're much more cautious about those forecasts and are actually advising investors to move out of companies with major China exposure today. If we look at Europe, there's a lot of variation between what is consumed in European markets. Italy and France stand out as large wine markets, largely due to historic reasons. Southern Europe has more beer consumption, and Northern Europe seeing a bit more spirits. But this is also changing over the next, or has been changing over the past decade. We're seeing a declining per capita consumption in most of these European markets, and we typically put that down to the aging populations in Europe as well. Beer's typically taking share of alcohol consumption, especially in the traditional wine markets of Italy and France, and Spain is also beer is taking share of throat in Spain. Now, we think that's largely a combination of affordability factors, as well as some of the targeted advertising from the large brewers. I mean, Heineken specifically call this out as part of the group strategy. If we look at the UK, it's also facing a declining per capita consumption. Spirits is taking share of volume, and beer is growing well in value terms, but the UK's young population is only flatlining, and some of you will be aware that the economy has barely grown on a per capita basis over the past 20 years. So we're continuing to see a declining UK market as well, and I wouldn't expect that to change anytime soon. France, beer is the only category that's getting any growth on a per capita basis. It's typically taking the share from wine in a declining alcohol market. And again, like the UK, France is facing a relatively modest change in demography over the next decade. And again, I wouldn't expect this decline to really stop over the next few years. Italy's been a relatively interesting market because we've actually seen a growth in per capita consumption in the second half of the last decade. It has declined since the pandemic, and spirits are typically taking share, beer's taking share from spirits in that time. We believe that the real increase in that last 5 years of last decade was due to tourism, and the increased tourism in Italy driving more per capita consumption of Italians. And of course, tourists are not included in that number. But tourism has really declined since the pandemic. Fewer Chinese people are coming over to Italy, and that's also, we think, likely causing a decline in the alcohol market in Italy. Now, to end on a high, I'm going to touch on the Indian market, because that is typically the second or third biggest market for some of the companies we look at in detail. Now, India's market very much skews towards spirits. It's largely an Indian-made spirits market. There is Scotch, of course, but it's dominated by Indian-made liquor. Now, we have seen an extraordinary growth in per capita consumption in India over the past couple of decades. It's grown at nearly 5% per capita in most of the markets. The market is overwhelmingly spirits, as you can see, a big green chart there. But we are seeing wine grow from a very, very small base. And in recent years, beer's been a strong growth market for some of the major companies. It's a big market for companies like Heineken and Carlsberg, which have really invested heavily in the Indian market. But as the market opens up with the recently signed trade deals, and that's between the UK and India, and also the EU and India, we're expecting to see spirits take a more important share of the Indian market as the affordability of these international products should improve. And I would expect quite a material growth in Scotch whisky going into India over the next couple of years, and there'll be the opportunities for some of the European spirits to also take share in the Indian market. So in conclusion, when we look at some of these important markets around the world, there will be pockets of growth, but I think you've got to be quite specific about where we look. We are optimistic about the US market and how that's going to recover from the declines that we've seen since the pandemic. And I would say India is going to be the most interesting emerging market over the next decade. We're very cautious on how China's going to recover. I appreciate there's been some slightly improved signs over the past couple of months, but long term we're expecting the Chinese market to continue to decline. And then also in Europe, a bit of a managed decline in most of these markets, not really expecting any increase in per capita consumption because European markets are already at a relatively high level and the demographies are not helpful for a growing alcohol market. So I hope that's been helpful. And maybe, Alex, if you had any questions to cover, happy to go through anything.
I do have questions, of course. Thank you very much. Very interesting insights. But I happily leave the questions to the audience. Is there any questions on specific topics? Can we dive into something a bit more? Just right here, the lady. Good morning, Isabel.
Good morning. Thanks so much for this, wow, great data presentation. Wow, loads of insights. One question regarding the Indian market. Is there any such thing as the Indian market, as the states have very different regulations on alcohol, plus then you have the different languages, different consumer basically perspectives, insights, etc. So is there anything like the Indian market?
It's a really good question because you're absolutely right. India is seen as 20 different countries within it. Each state had its own regulation. There's import taxes when you go into a state. There's export taxes when you take alcohol out of a state. And so you're right that you shouldn't think about it as a total market, but the changes that we've seen in regulation from these trade deals do mean that it can be a more important market for the major companies that are going in. It will likely have greater cost to enter the Indian market because you've got to be able to satisfy the regulation of all these different states. So we do see the big companies really benefiting from these changes, the Diageos, the Pernod Ricards, William Grant, these sorts of businesses that can afford that infrastructure and afford that regulatory cost. But we don't get so much data on the Indian states. It's very difficult to come by. We get the data at a country level. We follow the news flow when it comes to how states have changed regulation, or you do get states go dry every so often, or change taxes in some examples. And so we do track how much of each Diageo, Pernod Ricard, Heineken, Carlsberg sell in each state as best as we can. But the data are not as freely available as they are at a country level.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? I don't see any hands. Yes, Patrick.
Just wondering about any pockets of growth within Europe. Yesterday we heard that, for instance, Poland was an emerging, fast-growing market and an increasing economy as well. I don't know about the demographics.
No, you're absolutely right. Poland's actually getting a bit more migration back to Poland as well. So that's increasing the pool available to it. I think within Europe, I'd be looking at some of the southern European markets for beer. Northern Europe might be getting a bit of a better spirits consumption, but one of the issues that's facing Europe at the moment is the level of inflation. And typically when you get inflation going into markets, you see people trading down, but they also trade out of spirits and into beer. So I would typically see Europe as a bit more of a beer market going forwards rather than a spirits market. But in total, I'd expect the per capita consumption of alcohol to continue to decline. If we were to pick out pockets of countries that could be a little bit better, I mean, Poland is not a bad example, and a lot will depend on what's going to be happening with the Ukrainian-Russian war. If that were to get a peaceful conclusion, then we'd see a bit more of an improvement in the Eastern European bloc as well.
Thank you so much. I would then close with one last question, one quick last question to you. We talk about existing and new markets all the time, the last 3 days. What would you, from your point of view, recommend to an importer, a seller of wine and spirits, how to diversify strategically new versus old or existing markets, where to invest, where to put the focus on?
Yeah, so if I was thinking about the world, we typically see countries like the US as the basis of any major company and where you'd want a decent foothold. The interesting emerging markets are largely Latin America, India, and Africa can also drive. And we've got a huge amount of growth of young people coming through Africa, but of course there's regulation, there's corruption, there's issues with the economies in some of the African markets, but will be an important beer market, I think, over the next decade. And we'd just be much more cautious about having the exposure to places like China, like Europe, some of the Eastern Asian places like Japan, Korea, these sorts of markets that are going to continue to face issues. So yeah, US, LATAM, Africa, stay away from Europe and China as best as you can.
Okay, got it. Thank you so very much. Give a round of applause for Laurence. Thank you for being at the Agora station.
Thanks very much,
today.
Alex.
Yes, so to get to our next keynote. The wine industry, as you all know, is facing major changes, and the bigger the market, the bigger the challenges. The USA is the largest market in the world for alcoholic beverages. And of course, it is struggling with sales in free fall, rising production costs, and a complicated distribution system that doesn't make business any easier. But our next speaker offers reason for optimism. Erin Kirschenmann is the managing editor of the magazine Wine Business Monthly. She is a WSET diploma holder and instructor, and a keynote speaker at international conferences such as ours. And she knows the US market inside out. And she says, yes, the US market is experiencing a transformation, but it also opened new opportunities for international producers. In her presentation, she will explain to us where the US market stands right now and where it is headed. And she will outline new market and entry strategies and discover concrete market potentials. Erin, welcome on stage, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Laurence, for teeing this session up absolutely perfectly. My job today is to highlight the negative aspects of trying to do business in the US, but also offer some bright spots. I'm going to try to offer a realistic view of what's happening there, And then at the end, wrap up with why you need to be in the US market now, why this is the time to be investing. So a little bit about us. Wine Business Monthly is a B2B trade publication for the wine industry. It is our job to cover everything from soil to shelf, including what's happening in the distribution market, grapes and bulk wine market, even HR. We take all that data together and bring some context to our readers. So I'm going to start out today with the negative. I'm going to be negative Nancy for a little bit. We're going to go through what the new normal is in the United States, what's happening with the consumer, what is going on in distribution, and then I'm going to attempt to give some insight into our government. Full disclosure, not a Trump voter, okay? At the end, thank you. At the end, I'm going to wrap up with some bright spots and some key takeaways so that if you do decide to enter into the US market, you're doing it in a smart and sustainable way. So first, what is the new normal in the US? No one knows. We don't know. We're all kind of in a state of flux. The answer differs based on who you're talking to and what time of day you're talking to them. We know that our market volume is down, right? Americans are drinking less. This is no secret. You all know it. The reasons that they're drinking less, for the most part, just drinking less in general. But what I really want to point out here is the second reason. There are not as many occasions for Americans to drink wine. They don't see wine as part of their daily lives. We've made some headway, but we're not quite there yet. Okay? So, the American consumer has changed and is going to continue to change over the next 10 years. What's most important, and I don't want to dive too deep into some of the same data that Laurence spoke about, but I want to point out that the American is increasingly changing. We are becoming less and less white, which is a good thing. We are becoming a more multicultural consumer. Gallup is predicting that by 2050, whites will be in the minority. We see increased Black, African American populations, Latino, Hispanic populations, and increasingly Asian populations. These are the markets and the people that American producers are starting to market to. That's where the growth is going to be coming from. Increasingly, with these consumers, we see that wine is just not part of their drinking occasion. It is not part of their culture. We have not marketed to their food, to their cuisine. We have not shown them that going out on a hike is a perfect time to have a glass of wine, or in this particular case, a can of wine, Tetra Pak. We have done a fantastic job of romanticizing wine in the United States. It is the beverage of choice for romantic dates, for celebrating a promotion or a milestone with your friends. It is perfect for trying to impress the boss. High-end occasions. We haven't shown them that just having a glass of wine at the end of the day is reason enough to drink. Had a good day at work? Glass of wine. Had a bad day of work? Maybe two. We haven't done that yet. Increasingly, we're seeing dinner at a casual restaurant be less and less of a wine opportunity. It is being taken over by cocktails, mocktails, and beer. Where we see growth is in people who are changing these occasions. And I also want to point out where Americans are buying their wine, and that is obviously, of course, in grocery stores, traditional wine outlets, but more and more it's online. It is on their phone as an impulse purchase. Americans really need that instant hit of gratification when they buy something on their phone. Now more than ever. Okay? Take a look at online retailers, drugstores, phone purchases, making purchases through social media as easy as possible. TikTok has changed it up a little bit, but Instagram is still a great way to sell wine online. All right, the next question I always get asked, what is happening in distribution? It is a shark eat shark world out there. I'm sure that you have heard about Republic National Distribution Company. They exited California. They are going to continue exiting some states. Reyes Beverage Group is going to buy them out of some key markets, including Florida and Washington, D.C. For the most part, this has settled out. RNDC's exit has been kind of completed at this point. All of the suppliers that RNDC had are now with other distributors, but we are going to see a little bit more movement as we go. So you all know how difficult distribution is. It is dominated by Southern Glazer's Wine Company. They have more than 1,000 US producers. They basically run the market. But Reyes is coming in, and they really, really want to take over from Southern Glazers. They do not make their money in beverage alcohol. They are the logistics provider for large companies like McDonald's and Chipotle. That's where they're making their money. They're worth about $50 billion. They've made a play into beer, and now with RNDC leaving, they're making a play into wine. They told a friend of mine who works with them, they're not going to settle until they are the largest distributor in the US. So keep an eye out for them. The other thing we're seeing with distribution is that all of these companies are increasingly moving toward the high end, toward luxury portfolios. That's where they're making their money. We know that sales of wines under $20 are not doing as well as those above. And the distributors are seeing that as well in their margins. They're making moves for that. Man, I wish this was wine. What is happening with our government? The long and short of it is, we don't really know. Every day it's a brand new news cycle. Every day it's a new topic. It's this tariff, and unfortunately now there's a war. I cannot offer too much insight into what he's doing. But I can say it is affecting the American consumer. We are losing trust in our government. The people that tariffs were supposed to help the most, farmers, manufacturers, are feeling it more than others. These tariffs are disproportionately causing more increase in cost of goods to those in the lower and middle classes. And as a result, even though all of our economic indicators, all of the numbers, say that we have a good, stable economy, Americans don't feel it. We are tired, just as much as you are. We don't trust it. All of our costs of goods are going up. Rent is going up. We just don't have faith. So consumer sentiment is unraveling. You can be in a great spot in your career and in your finances, and yet you still feel poor. So this is part of the reason that Americans are consuming less. Wine is seen as a luxury good, right? We've already said that this is the high-end product. We're just spending less in general. So that's all the negative, okay? Let's look at some of the bright spots instead. I want to leave you feeling like the US is still an interesting and good market. The biggest question I'm asked every single time, what are the hot US markets? And when people ask me this, they're expecting me to say one of these regions. They're expecting me to say New York, Virginia, Florida, California, Oregon, Washington. These are the fun, nice states. This is not where the growth is. These are highly saturated markets. You want to go into the Midwest. Every producer I speak with, every distributor, wholesaler, importer I speak with, says that the Midwest is primed for growth. These are areas that have been historically underserved and ignored. They're also the regions that people who are leaving the coastal states because housing costs are too high, they lost their job, they're moving back in with their family, they want to start a family, they want a bigger place for their children. These are all the areas that they're going. I will say, be careful when you go in there. They are highly distrustful people, Midwesterners. I went to a conference in Nebraska a couple weeks ago, and I was seen as the Californian who knows too much and is trying to tell them how to change their lives. I'm like, well, you brought me out here to talk about wine trails, so where's the disconnect here? They don't like fancy suits. They don't like talking about the government. They don't like feeling lesser than. These are farmers, manufacturers, really hard workers. Go in a pair of jeans, ask them questions, talk about farming, and you'll win in this market. Some of the top cities that we're seeing growth in are, of course, Kansas City, Missouri. That's a really popular one. That one's almost starting to become a little bit saturated, not quite. Lincoln and Omaha, Nebraska have a ton of railroad money, and they love a good steak. If you have a big, bold red, you need to be playing in this market. Michigan is another great growth state. Detroit, of course, but Ann Arbor, Traverse City, Grand Rapids are much more primed for growth. They have been historically ignored. So pick a city in the Midwest. It's small. You're not going to see immediate and large ROI. But if you do the legwork, put boots on the ground, and start working with these consumers, they're going to buy into your brand. They're going to feel special. And then when growth starts to come back, when we start to feel a little bit more confident in our spending power, they're going to buy in with your brand and they're going to buy in more. Distributors also love people who play in these cities. They see the growth in Lincoln and say, you know what, maybe we can try that in DC. So if you're having a hard time getting into the New York, Miami, LA markets, use these places as a testing ground first. All right, where else are we getting growth? What about the younger consumer? The younger consumer does like wine. They just like sweeter, fruitier, and smoother styles. That's not surprising. They like sparkling and fun formats. They want to be able to go out on the Russian River and go in a llama floaty, drinking a can of really good wine. That might be me. They want special but not stuffy occasions. Younger consumers are tired of elitism. They are tired of this boring standard tasting. We're seeing this in the direct-to-consumer market as well. People want to go to wineries and just drink wine with their friends and their family. They don't want a 4-course meal with perfectly paired wines. They want to explore it on their own. And last but not least, the most important thing that younger consumers want is a chance to discover. They want a chance to sample and find out for themselves if they like it. This ties back into our wine drinking occasions. They want a new occasion to drink wine. So how do you find these new occasions? The thing that we're talking about in the US the most is collaborations. Finding ways to bring wine to non-wine drinkers or to other hobbies is what's winning in the US market. These are just some of the examples that I have seen do really well. Wolf of Wine is wine and hip hop. He regularly sells out chateaus in Burgundy and wineries in the US, holding a hip hop concert with wine producers. Blood of Gods is a heavy metal wine zine. You go to heavy metal concerts and you see big tatted up men with long hair chugging wine. Not quite chugging, but they're downing it pretty good. We're bringing wine to something that you would not normally have associated wine with. And man, do these guys like it. We're seeing it in fashion. Silver Oak Cellars worked with a designer to come up with a Cabernet stained dress, right? The fashion industry hadn't really thought about wine until this. A little shameless self-promotion here, wine and books. I started up a side company called Novel Pairings where we pair the wine to the book that we're reading. I am getting great feedback from readers because they love nothing more than to sit down at the end of a long day, drink a glass of wine, and read their latest romantasy novel. It's working. The discovery there, because I'm talking about the wine in their terms, is doing really well. We also see it in the automotive industry. Velocity Invitational is a classic car show. And who are the prime buyers of wine? A little bit older guys who like classic cars. They didn't know about some of these wines, but now they're drinking them while they're watching cars on a track. There are so many more other opportunities that you can go with. Crocheting, cross-stitching. There are sessions called, excuse my language here, stitch and bitch sessions. Perfect wine opportunities to sponsor. We said earlier that the younger generation wants a chance to sample. Wine festivals done in a smart way are starting to make a comeback. Hella Shannon is the latest example of this. It's bringing together very, very young demographic with the more traditional wine drinker. I have never gone to a festival and felt so old in my life, and I'm in my 30s. This was really exciting to see. They sold out their first year. They opened up tickets for this year's event, sold out within a month. They're now launching one based on Syrah. We're seeing festivals come back, but not in the traditional sense. People don't want to go taste 300 different producers in a ballroom. They instead want to go out to a really cool warehouse district in Berkeley, eat at some great food trucks, hang out with their friends, let the kids run wild on the playground, and drink some great wine. So to wrap this up, yes, the US is in a state of turmoil. I'm going to argue that you need to stay the course. Okay, this is the time to invest so that when we get out of this in hopefully 3 years, you will be primed for growth. Okay? Ignore the big cities. The Midwest is your best bet. Find the fun in wine. Walking the halls here, I'm seeing a lot of creative labels. I'm seeing a lot of interesting wine blends. Keep doing this. Keep innovating. Show them that wine is not stuffy. And last but not least, collaborate. Find a successful collaboration. Pick your favorite hobby and collaborate with somebody who's doing really well in that space. Use their audience to bring wine to them. If you want more information about what's happening with distribution and how to win in that space, a friend of mine just launched a distribution academy. They're put together a really interesting set of coursework to help you understand what these distributors want. And with that, I'm always happy to take questions, but please, I'm aware America is a little wild right now. I have looked into ways to leave it many times. But the thing is, when this is all over, we will continue to be the largest wine market, and we will continue to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erin. Very, very interesting. And I'm pretty sure that raised some questions in the audience. Anyone over there? Can we have the microphone over there? Just on the corner. Yeah.
Thank you, Erin. That was an amazing presentation. I spoke yesterday on the China market and how apps there are helping consumers discover wine through occasion and just completely leapfrogging what can be perceived as the stuffiness or rules-based world we have about learn this knowledge, then you can enter our world. We did exactly, this is more commentary than anything, but we explored exactly the same things that connecting people over, say, craft, creativity. I love that stitch and bitch thing, but we sort of learning about wine in different parts of the world by separate geographies, but I think that there's lots of linkages that we can make in the presentations over the past 3 days, and I think there can be a lot of cross-geography learnings, and maybe some of the cool technology in China with, say, Little Red Book, where you learn through interest, could be applied to the US.
We're hoping. We're going to get a little bit more of that. We're starting to see it with TikTok. There's a complete section called STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and people are going there for micro-learning. We're seeing that. We're also seeing a lot of these collaborations around geography. Interestingly, Formula One is making a huge impact in the United States right now, thanks to a Netflix documentary, Drive to Survive. As a Formula One fan myself, what I ended up doing was hosting dinners where if they were in Spain for the race, I would cook Spanish food and pair it with Spanish wine. And that got my friends interested in both Formula One and Spanish wine. So now we're starting to see more of that happen in this space. Glad to hear it's not just us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Another question? I'll come up with one idea. I really liked how you explained that the younger consumers do like a more fun, uncomplicated way to learn about wine or to taste and try wines. yet the industry is somewhat still very traditional and hesitant. Yeah, what do you, how do you see that evolving? Do you see some changes? You brought a good example, but the broader picture sometimes to me looks still a bit more traditional than pacing fast forward. What do you think?
There will always be a place for traditional heritage luxury in the American wine market. But for a younger consumer who's been tired of being told what to do and how to think, they want to be unique in their own way. They want to go out and find something a little bit different. So we are going to continue to have a place for it. Some of the brands that I see doing really well in this space, a lot of, obviously, Prosecco in the canned RTDs, right? Those are winning in the casual space. They're winning in the kids' birthday party space. It's just really all about finding formats. You don't have to change your brand. You just need to change your packaging or a little bit of an approach. Don't try to educate them on it. Just show them that this is the occasion that you drink my wine.
So the good news is you don't have to
No,
completely
don't start
change
over.
everything.
No.
You just need to make little adjustments.
Exactly.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, just don't over-educate.
Yeah.
They don't care about terroir.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next keynote will be all about Germany, but don't be fooled. This is not because we are in Germany. It is because Germany is the largest wine importer by volume and thus a much desired market for a lot of producers. But it is also a quite complicated market. There are big importers, there are distributors, there are trade agencies who do not import the wines themselves, but they arrange deals. There are large supermarkets, and guess who sells the most wine in Germany? It is this discounter supermarket chain. And then there are specialized wine stores, small and large, and of course there are restaurants and hotels with or without a sommelier. So navigating these structures can be quite painful, but don't despair. Help is on its way in the form of an experienced wine journalist and German market expert. Felix Bodmann previously worked in business development before turning his hobby, obviously wine, into a profession. He frequently writes for well-known industry publications such as Meiningers International or Weinwirtschaft, and he runs a very widely followed blog as well as a Germany's leading fine wine podcast called Blindflug, which is all about blind tasting wines. Felix will give us an overview of the key figures and the market players and consumer trends, and he will also share a few valuable tips on how to deal with the German mentality, an important soft skill in business relationships. Welcome on the Agora stage. Felix, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So, there you are. Okay. How to Conquer the German Market is a very German title. I'm aware of that, but I just wanted to make sure everybody understands I am German, so I know what I'm talking about. I don't need to speak about me anymore. The agenda is very typical, but still, 3 years ago, this would have been a presentation very much focusing on data and analysis and statistics, but I think you all are able to point your browser to ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, give me an overview of the German market, and you'll get all that. So I won't be focusing on that. I'll be, ChatGPT gives you the strategy, I give you the tactics, and I also give you a little bit about the Germans and how to deal with them, because I know we are special. But still, a quick run through the data. I'm not going to read all of this out because they only gave me 15 minutes. So we are the largest crowd in Europe, and we're stone old. And that's not because our life expectancy is so high. It is because we hate children. So therefore, we intoxicate them. And the most important number on this chart here is, there it is 16. 16 is the legal drinking age for wine in Germany. So you can market your product to quite a young crowd. Of course, the numbers are down 7% by value and volume last year in sales. But we've heard a lot about inflation. So Germany was hit very hard. And we've lost a lot of purchasing power based on 2019. And we had 2 very strong years in growth of salary in 24 and 23. So actually, we will reach the 2019 Purchasing Power Index again in 26. And assuming that wine is the first thing to save on and the last thing to return to normal, that would actually mean some moderate growth for Germany, if not by volume, then at least by value. So if you look at wine sales by channel, you'll find out that our data quality is very poor. First of all, because we do not have an excise duty on wine. We have one on sparkling wine. So whenever we look at sparkling wine statistics, we have everything down by the bottle. If we look at still wine, it's a lot of guesswork because 2/3 are sold by companies that are either family-owned or cooperatives. They publish data on the general ledger level, which means there's absolutely no specific number on wine or alcoholic beverages published by them, and it all needs to be sort of done through market research. This also means that wine has very few boots on the ground in Germany. 2 out of 3 bottles are picked without any contact with somebody who knows something about wine. And that, of course, makes it very hard to raise the awareness for quality in that sector. It also means that as a foreign producer, you need to be creative and or spend a lot of money on building a brand and building reputation. Above-the-line advertising in an 83 million country is not affordable. That's something for car manufacturers. So you need to do smart things below the line or in the B2C sector, POS, etc. One special thing here, major hub for overseas bulk wine. I wrote a story about South African wine in Germany, and the South Africans told me, we do not know how much wine we sell in Germany. More than 60% is sold by bulk. We have some of the largest bottling companies of the planet in Germany. It's bottled here, it's re-exported to Denmark and to the Netherlands primarily, and then it is re-exported as German wine. It doesn't mean that they fake the label. It means that the barcode starts with a 4, and all the statistics are done by barcode. So there is then an excise duty to be paid in the Netherlands or in Denmark, and that is all processed between an importer in Denmark and a German exporter. So therefore, if you are a foreign producer and you hear of a great spike in your exports to Germany and you think of a golden future, maybe you want to check first whether one of the importers from a neighboring country started funneling his imports through a German bottling company, because that mistake has been made before, right? So it doesn't mean a spike in export to Germany, it doesn't mean it's actually being sold in Germany. You need to investigate that a little bit. So what ChatGPT might not tell you, and this is the bad news, is we're always ranking high by volume, always higher than by value, and I have to apologize, the Rueda thing, there's a glitch there. We're second, we're not first. First is the Netherlands. If you look at the Barolo numbers, and the format is because I stole all these pie charts from other presentations, right? 12% of Barolo goes to Germany, but every supermarket and every discount store has its Barolo on the shelf for $11.99. So about half of that is actually the cheapest stuff you can get. If you compare it to Barbaresco, there's no cheap Barbaresco. The export to Germany is only 6%. So that's how you can sort of find out. If you go to Ribera del Duero, that's horrible. It's $8.65 average price per liter versus 13.9 average across the globe. If you take out the Germans, it's actually even close to 15 euros for the rest of the world, and we get all the cheap stuff. But looking back at Rueda, it also tells you it's not because we pay less for the same. It's very often, if you go over there, they are, and look at who is searching distribution in Germany, it's all the top-notch companies, right? We buy the cheap stuff, unfortunately. So like in Rueda, there's this fantastic success story of Bodegas Lurton, the Campo Eliseo, worldwide global seller. They're looking for distribution in Germany for 5 years now. Or if you take another example, José Pariente, great producer. It took them 4 or 5 years. Last year they signed their distribution deal. So in these numbers, they're still not included. So why Germany? If I have all these negative news here. First of all developed markets are difficult. Nobody's waiting for you, right? I mean, it's just, it is difficult in these markets. Why not go for the biggest import market? Because that, of course, may yield the biggest results. And also, Germany is a specialty as the only top 10 wine producing country in the world where the majority of locals hate their own product. more than 50% of the Germans say, I don't drink German wine because it's thin and sour. Germany's just not warm enough to produce great wines. For you, that means in further reductions, you will still have a loyal base of consumers for foreign origins and foreign brands. They don't turn to the local produce as they might do in other developed markets. And finally, you can have your Frank Sinatra moment in Germany. If I can make it there, I'll make it anywhere. And that brings us to the products and actually to what Erin told us before, which is setting the stage here. I'm not going to read out everything. I just want to point out that a lot of the very highly regarded products in Germany are due to tourism. Germans love the wine that they encounter in their holidays and bring it back. So of all the international destinations, Argentina has been crushed, New Zealand, Australia, they're all struggling. Only the South Africans are still doing quite okay because the Germans love the pinotage that they drink when they're on holidays. We're a strong tourist group in South Africa. It's the same with the Lago di Garda, where the Lugana comes from. Garda DOC is doing extremely well. It's growing in Germany. We are the #1 export destination for Mallorca wines. So therefore, it is a good first step to market your wines, to make an experience for German tourists. If you have German tourists, present your wines in your home. It's also the cheapest way to market your wines to Germans, so that there is a desire for your wines in Germany. Another important thing, and this is about the Frank Sinatra moment, if you look at what's going on internationally, France is bringing on a new legislation that allows 9 grams of sugar in Côte-du-Rhône or Bordeaux AOP wines. And in Spain, if you look at Martin Kodash has launched an off-dry Albarino. I heard it was originally for the German market. It never got here because the Spanish drink it. The Blanc Pescador, their fizzy off-dry wine, they doubled production because they see international potential. So it's getting sweeter everywhere. And I think that after decades of being the pain in the neck market, we might become actually the new normal. So I call that a Germanification of international. Germanization sounds so horrible. We had that before, right? So a Germanification of international market, and that means business-wise, it's fierce negotiations about prices, and product-wise, it's more bling-bling on the outside and more sugar on the inside. Now, I've done 2 pieces on who is who in Germany. If I had included that would be another 15 minutes. I wrote them for Mining International, and then they restructured the site. It's no longer online. If you want to know who is who, the names, the companies, the people, who to reach out to, just drop me your business card, maybe put down who is who on it so I know what it's about, and I'm going to send you the PDFs of those if you like. Now, let's assume you start working with a German, or you want to start working with a German importer and you want to be successful here. You have to understand, importers in Germany are working the trade. I've been to Alba in December for the Nebbiolo Prima, and I spoke to my colleagues from Toronto, from New York, from Singapore, and I said, what are your prime sources of information? And they said, well, first of all, it's the big importer tastings that happen every year. All the importers bring in all the wines they get. We don't have that in Germany. Right? 2 or 3 do a roadshow, mostly for trade. I'm not even invited. They don't do nothing. So German importers work the trade. They don't do B2B in case of press, and they don't do sponsorings, POS, below the line. You have to do that yourself. So if you look at successful international wineries here, like Donna Fugata or Hill Family Estates, they have all hired their own PR agency in Germany. It doesn't stop with signing up with an importer. That's, I think, quite an interesting and important difference here. So, how to handle the Germans? Let's start with the consumer. You may have heard consumers like medals, bling, bling, bling. But I actually took the time to walk to a couple of stores and take some pictures of shelves that I had taken pictures of 10 years ago. I'm just too stupid to include this in PowerPoint. And you'll see that the number of medals has decreased by, I'd say, 50%. So 5 years ago, I would have advised you to send all your wines to the Berlin Wine Trophy and to Mundus Vini even before starting to export to Germany. But now I'd say, if you've got medals and good scores, put them on the bottle. Make sure everybody understands that, but you don't have to necessarily focus on that. Germans don't value tradition the way maybe Italians or French do, and I think again, maybe a bit like in the US, they want a more direct reward when tasting a wine. It's not like, oh, this is a wine from a winery that's 150 years old. So it's more like very focused on the taste. Maybe that is the reason why we have so much sugar in our wines. Now, speaking about the people that you want to work with, the importers, I'm sure, I mean, it's day 3 of the ProWein, you had your experiences here, you met with importers, and every conversation starts maybe the same way, like, how are you today? How was your day so far? Except you meet the Germans, the first question is, how much? And that is very often considered very rude. They're very direct about talking about prices, but having done business development in another industry before, when I went to Spain, when I went to Italy, they take you out for lunch, and they talk about their favorite holiday destinations and their upcoming wedding of their son, and then when coffee is served, they start talking business. That drives a German nuts, you know. But that's also because they want to get to know you, and if they know you and they like you, they make things happen. That's not how Germany works. Germans have this saying, strenge Rechnung, treue Freundschaft, which translates to strict calculation, loyal friendship, and it means don't intermingle the personal with the business stuff. We don't do business based on favors that we owe each other. We do business based on numbers, and if the numbers don't match, we're not going to spend 3 hours. I'm not going to waste 3 hours of your time during lunch. So we find out over coffee that there's no chance anyway. So in a nutshell, you should have your numbers straight. Whenever you meet a German, you should be prepared for a price discussion. Doesn't need to be the final one, but it should be well prepared. So you want to, if you work with a German importer, if you want to find the right German importer, you actually want to first tell them that you're a great organization with great people, achievers, right? Secondly, you have a plan how to conquer the German market, including maybe a case study. Germans love case studies from another market, and that you're willing to allocate time, budget, and resources to it. And thirdly, that you got the product to support that plan. And yes, it is in that order. Product comes third. So if you're in this for the love of wine, dealing with your German importer might not be your favorite part of the job. So finally, you're modern people. If you put together your presentation, you will use ChatGPT, I'm sure. So here's the prompt for ChatGPT. Hey, ChatGPT, build me a presentation that starts with a company overview, and then balancing tradition with flexible. List our wines, including all the points and medals. Gives a pricing overview and put a lot of stuff in the annex. Includes a case study of B2C and POS activity. And finally, then suggest a nice place for lunch. So happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Very good insights. I as a German, have to laugh about that. Do we have questions? Well, then I'm happy to ask. Regarding your last slide, everything in Germany is about studies and data and numbers. But what's about the storytelling and the emotion that we all love about wine? Is that completely unnecessary in Germany?
Well, I think if you have people telling the story, it is actually quite interesting. But you have to also think about the supermarket wines, etc. That's much more complicated. So a lot of my friends ask me for tips for wines because in certain milieus it's very popular to open a wine, speak a minute about it, or maybe 2, to make it something special, then pour it and talk about something else. But I think that's price point 10 euros and up, and below it's not like that.
Okay. That brings me to my next and last question, if there's not one coming up from the audience. We now learned Germany is very cheap and very cheap. Is there just no room for premium wines, or is there? And what would you recommend someone who still wants to conquer the premier channels, hospitality, restaurants, etc.?
I think we've seen a strong increase in the average price, and Germany used to be something like €3 something. It's up more than 50%. And I think that we are very much focusing, and I was actually asked to focus on those 2/3 that we were speaking about. The other third may be actually the more dynamic market at the moment. But we have to also understand that if you look around here at ProWein, how many top producers are looking for distribution. There's so much great wine in the world. It's just no longer enough to say, hey, I'm here, I make these great wines, and now you go and sell me. And that is completely independent on who you are. And I think some of the companies I mentioned are extremely good at actually making this move towards storytelling with nice wines and sponsorships of maybe local events, etc., etc.
So yeah, message learned. Conquering Germany means a bit more effort
Yes.
and efficiency.
Much more effort. Yes.
Thank you very much, Felix.
Thank you.